One of the other things this channel is about, if you're new to my channel, is it's about breaking some of these myths that you see so many of on YouTube. Myths about survival and what it takes and stuff like that. So a lot of times in my videos you'll see that I kind of think outside of the box. What I mean by that is there's just so many other channels out there on YouTube that from where I come from, they're really missing the boat. What I mean by that is I just think that they are following what other people say and what other people do, and then they kind of add it into their channel without really knowing or experience. Probably experience is probably a better word for it. Being able to experience this stuff for yourself. Like when you're out here in the winter. Cold is a real big issue. Getting cold, staying cold is a really big issue. And I'm afraid that on a lot of YouTube channels, they don't really understand cold. Probably like I don't really understand how wet it is and humidity in Washington State, on the other side of the country. I probably couldn't grasp humidity from what I've seen, heard, and been told. So this is kind of some things I like to say myth busting. So, but that's what the channel is about. Good morning. My name is Tom. I come to you from the Rustic log cabin in northern Maine. Welcome to my channel. Today's video, I want to discuss some of the myths around fire building, technique, and materials. And the reason I want to do this is because of some of the stuff that you see and being taught and told that just doesn't make any sense to me. I like to say you can probably judge a man's ability out in the wilderness for self-reliance is if he's a leader, number one. Leader means you think outside of the box. And when everything looks like it's down and out, you're the guy that can come up with the fix. Whether you're out in a boat or on a snowmobile, you break down, anything like that. But what today is about is fire. I get off on a little tangent there, but what it's about is about fire. What I was getting at was a lot of people that don't have much experience when it comes to fire, this is probably a pretty key phrase that they'll come up with. Well, if you get into trouble, old man's beard. Old man's beard, that'll work for a fire. Well, this right here is old man's beard. I don't consider this a very good tinder at all. Now, it's been bone dry here for most of the summer. It'll probably work right now. But the problem with old man's beard is that it hangs down in the trees just like you see right there. See this right here? And what does that do? When it's humid, all that does is suck up moisture like a sponge. That's why I don't consider that to be a very good tinder at all. Now I'll come back to this in a few minutes and we'll discuss the preparation for using this. And this is an old man's beard, but this is kind of like a fungus or a moss that grows in the same tree as that old man's beard. The same thing there. Now today, this stuff is bone dry. But even being bone dry doesn't mean it's going to take a spark. Same thing with this. If you crumble that up into a bird's nest and hit it with a spark from a flint and steel, I doubt very much if you could get it to take. Just the way it is. The same thing with a ferro rod. I doubt very much, even with the hot steel that flies off a ferro rod, I don't believe this would take, even in this condition. That's why I don't think either one of these make a very good tinder. And that's why I call this myth busting today. But I'll come back to that in a minute and tell you how you can use this with just a little bit of preparation. And these things are in this state, we have a lot of snow. It's anywhere from 4 to 6 feet deep most of the winter. So you need to find stuff that's high and dry. This is dry leaves. Even after all of the hard winds and snows, on an ash tree up here, this is probably some of my favorite stuff to come across in the middle of the winter. I don't bypass it, that's for sure. If I see it on a tree and I'm out snowshoeing, I of course grab as much as I can grab. You can rake it right off and stick that in your haversack or stick it in your fire bag, because this stuff is bone dry. But the same thing here. If it's been raining or anything, this is not going to work very good. But if it's like in February up here, it's just cold and dry, other than a few snowstorms, this stuff will dry out immediately. This stuff will dry out instantly with just a little bit of wind. It's hanging up there in the tree. So to me, this is a great material. This, like I said, it acts more like a sponge. So this could take several days to dry out from the wind before it's worth anything. But this right here, that can blow in the wind maybe for an hour or so, and that stuff will be bone dry. And here's the other thing that's always out in the Maine forest that you can pretty much count on. This is the bark from a cedar tree. We also have white birch bark. Both of these are in the same category. Even though you don't see people talking about cedar bark that much, well, you know, they worship our white birch tree. But believe it or not, this is probably more plentiful up here than a white birch tree. And what makes this so good? This bark is full of natural oil. Full of natural oil. You could take and scrape this off with your knife, and it doesn't take much at all, and you can have a huge bird's nest of this bark. Fine scrapings off this bark. Now I ripped this off a tree. You can throw this in your fire as it's going. It makes a great top tinder because it's full of oil. But the tree itself, you don't need to peel this off the tree. This was a dead tree, so I grabbed it for today. But you can take your knife or your saw and just scrape the outside bark, and this will peel right off. It takes nothing at all to end up with, like I said, a huge bird's nest. So this right here is an excellent source of fire tinder in the Maine forest in the wintertime. So now let's get back to this old man's beard. The only way that I found this old man's beard to be of any value is if you pick it, scrape it off so you get your bird's nest, so that that'll work. And then what you need to do is you need to wrap it up in a cotton cloth, a handkerchief, something like that, something that will pull moisture away. And you take that and then you stick it inside of your coat, up against your long underwear. Your pocket won't work. It has to be, you can stick it in your armpit. You got to get it in where your body heat will suck the moisture out of this in order for you to use this for a tinder. Now if this is the only tinder you've got, that could take several hours. We're not talking a few minutes. we're talking you're going to need to ride around with that in your pocket for at least a couple of hours, and probably even preferably longer before this will become any kind of a tinder. That's why this is probably last on my list as far as looking for a piece of tinder, and the same thing with this. So these three piles right here, the cedar bark and white birch bark would be first on the list of looking for fire tinders. Second would be them leaves, and third would be this old man's beard. And that's why I call this a myth video today, because so many people, the only thing that they know about bushcraft when you hear them talk is old man's beard. And that's only because that's what they heard someone else say. It's kind of like that other famous saying that you hear on YouTube about 1 billion times a day. A widowmaker. That's an old widowmaker. They're talking about a tree limb that's getting ready to fall down. A widowmaker is only a widowmaker as if you do something very stupid. So who's the widowmaker? I'd say the person that did the stupid is the widowmaker. Because if you stay away from that tree that's got that hanging limb, it's never going to turn you into a widowmaker. It's never going to kill you. So stay away from it. It's like staying away from a cliff. If you walk up to a cliff and the wind blows you over the edge, well, was it the cliff's fault or was it your fault? It's the same thing with a widowmaker. It's like a giant waterfall. You know, if it's a 100-foot waterfall and you slip on the slippery rock and go over, was it the slippery rock's fault that you went over the cliff and died? I don't think so. I think it was you being stupid. Well, it's the same thing with widowmakers. Might even be the same thing in believing that old man's beard is a survival technique. It's not. So I hope you learned something with today's video about some of the wild tinders that's out in the bush here in the state of Maine. I'm sure in your state or in your country there is something of equal value. Just make sure to sort out what myth is to what is fact. The fact is crappy tinder. So I will see you in the next video. Throw me a bone. Subscribe to my channel. Hit the thumbs up. And thank you very much for being so supportive of this channel.